Hey, welcome to our Wednesday night Bible study. We are back in the book of Nehemiah. If you want to be flipping over there, we're going to start in chapter 4. And I'll give you a little insight as to why we are skipping chapter 3. It's because these guys didn't want to read all these names. But there are a lot of names in chapter 3. And I was going to say that these guys probably not probably, most of them, this is the only time you're ever going to read their name in the Bible. Meshulam, the son of Berechiah. I don't know who that is, but I know his name's recorded here. And his name's recorded here for basically one reason. Anybody want to venture a guess as to why that is? Because they did something for God. So the point I was going to make, had we read chapter 3, was that these guys, they didn't, people would look at them and say, okay, this guy's a goldsmith, or he repaired this little thing or that little thing or whatever. But they did something. There was a need, like we've been talking about, and they found an opportunity to use their skills or their plot in life, and they met some kind of need. And so their name is forever preserved in our Bibles. I think there's a lesson there for us too, that when we do good things, our name is preserved in a book that'll be the Lamb's Book of Life. So that's one of the things we could have talked about in chapter 3, but we won't talk about that anymore. We are going to get out of here in about 20 minutes tonight, and there are several things in chapter 4 that I think we do want to talk about, skipping over chapter 3. So, chapter 4, verse 1, if you want to read along with me. Now, when Sanballat, now this is not the first time we've heard that guy's name. We actually met him over at the end of chapter 2 in verse 19. When Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite servant and Geshem the Arab heard of it, they jeered at us and despised us. And so we already have a kind of an insight that Sanballat is not a great dude and is going to be a guy that's going to be a thorn in the flesh of God's people. So when Sanballat heard that we were building the wall, he was angry and greatly enraged, and he jeered at the Jews. And he said in the presence of his brothers and of the army of Samaria, what are these feeble Jews doing? Will they restore it for themselves? Will they sacrifice? Will they finish it up in a day? Will they revive the stones out of the heaps of rubbish and burned ones at that? Tobiah the Ammonite was beside him, and he said, yeah, what are they building? If a fox goes up on it, he's going to break down their wall. Hear, O God, for we are despised. Turn back their taunt on their own heads and give them up to be plundered in a land where their captives do not cover their guilt, and let not their sin be blotted out from your sight, for they have provoked you to anger in the presence of the builders. So we built the wall, and the wall was joined together to half its height, and the people had a mind to work. All right, pretty good head start there. What do you guys make of these first, or the events, I guess, of these first 6 verses?
All right. So we start off seeing the taunts of Sanballat, and those taunts aren't necessarily untrue. The wall wasn't going to be restored in a day, and it was currently rubbish. But Nehemiah was holding on to a deeper truth, and that's that God was with them, and He was going to see them through. And I think it's easy for us sometimes to get discouraged or to give up. When someone criticizes us when we're trying to serve God. But, Nehemiah gives us a great example of faith and God's ability to overcome or work through our shortcomings um, in order to accomplish his work. Go ahead. You got it. No, you got it. No. Well, getting down into verse 4 and 5, I think, we have another great example. Each time something arises, criticism or opposition, Nehemiah, his first resort is always prayer. And, I think oftentimes we can make that our last resort. We want to take things into our own hands and act right when something happens instead of, stopping and consulting God. And I think Nehemiah kind of shows us that mindset is backwards. Um, when we attempt to take things into our own hands, we can kind of, in a sense, take God out of the equation. And we should instead, allow God to be the righteous judge in every situation.
I think we can take from this that anything that we do for God, we should expect opposition. If we go from chapter 2, where Nehemiah has the bravery to go before the king and ask to go and rebuild and get the resources and the supplies, and he has the plan, and he puts the plan into action. And then we read chapter 3, and things seem to be going great, and you get this whole chapter of names of iron workers and gold workers and people that are groups of people that are going and they're rebuilding, and we get to half the wall at a really quick pace. And if you only had chapter 3, you would assume that things were going great and that the plan was coming together. But I think chapter 4 teaches us, starting to teach us, that everything that happens for God's people is going to come with opposition. The name for Satan literally means adversary. He is against us. He is against God. He is against God's people. And so I think we should expect, when we set out to do good things, good works for God, when we have a plan to put into practice things that God wants for us to do even today, we should expect opposition because there is an adversary, the devil, who wants to destroy. And so, in chapter 4, we start to see those things come about. We start to really see a cycle of good things being accomplished and then a setback or a threat. And then more things being accomplished and then a setback. And really through the next couple chapters, we're going to see a cycle play over and over and over again. And so where we've got to come in is decide, I guess as a way of maybe not summary, but application already, is what are we going to do with the opposition that we face with our work? I think we're used to thinking about ministers working in the church, but we all have a Christian work that we're to be doing. And so what are we going to do with the opposition that we face? Sanballat and Tobiah, they have some big reasons why they don't want this to succeed. They're going to lose their grip on their region. They're going to lose possibly trade routes. An independent Jerusalem with a wall is not good for them. That's going to signify that they have some strength, and you really want your enemies to be weak. That's kind of the gist of it. You want your enemies to be weaker so that you can take advantage of them when you need it. And so they use things like they show anger. They show mockery. They call them feeble Jews. What are these feeble Jews going to do? They make fun of their wall, saying that a fox is going to jump on it and the wall is going to fall down. They use threats. We're going to find out that they basically use terrorism. They send in small groups of people and they make their way in and they kill just a few at a time, and it scares people. And they use fear. And those are still things that Satan uses against us in our opposition. Opposition to what we need to do. So we got to decide: do we face opposition in the face of fear, or do we decide to back off to a more mediocre type of work? What do you think, Chad?
Well, part of this is, I think, that if we keep talking about walls and gates and Sanballat the Samaritan, then we lose a little bit of the focus here, because we don't really, I don't have to build a wall right now. I don't have to build a gate. I don't think I know any Samaritans, but I know that there's still work that needs to be done in my life that needs to get going, but there's always going to be opposition. And I'm thinking about some of the sermons that we've talked about over the last weeks, months. We've talked about the light of the world and the salt of the earth, and we're supposed to shine as lights and preserve the good and stop the decay of evil in our world. That's salt and light. We talked about do not judge this past Sunday, and my guess would be that since then we've probably had times in our lives where we've maybe judged somebody, and maybe in the wrong kind of way. I may have judged somebody this morning, now that I think about it. I didn't mean to, but yeah, I'm sorry about that. But the more that we try to do the right thing, and whether it's don't judge so much, or be the salt, or be the light, or be a better husband or a wife, or a better parent, or a better model for people to see Christ living in us, the more we try to do that kind of work, not building a wall or a gate or anything like that, but just doing the right thing in our lives, we're going to face opposition. All right, we see these guys, Sanballat and his buddies, Tobiah and folks, are all coming in, and they are opposing the work that God wants them to be doing. from the outside, and they bring threats, and they bring a little bit of humor, and they taunt these folks, and they ridicule them. And it is true that Nehemiah and the Jews who've gone back are pretty weak right now. But God's always used weak people to accomplish great things. Maybe that we got a problem with a lot of things in our life, but God can use people like us. No matter what opposition we face, He can use us to accomplish good things. Mind if I read a few more? All right, so in verse 7, so when Sanballat and Tobiah and the Arabs and the Ammonites and the Ashdodites heard that the repairing of the walls of Jerusalem was going forward and that the breaches were beginning to be closed, they were very angry. And they plotted together to come and fight against Jerusalem and to cause confusion in it. And we prayed to our God and set a guard as a protection against them day and night. And in Judah it was said, the strength of those who bear the burdens is failing. There's too much rubble, and by ourselves we will not be able to rebuild the wall. All right, so this is the first time that the opposition doesn't come from Sanballat and the other folks from the outside. This time it comes from within. All right, it's the folks in Judah who are part of God's people and saying, you know what? They're right. Maybe we are too weak, and maybe the burden is too big, and maybe there are too many cracked rocks and burned up stuff. And so now they're starting to doubt themselves. What do y'all make of that?
So we've been talking about opposition this whole time, and looking back at chapter 2, verse 10, it says, "But when Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite servant heard this, it displeased them greatly that someone had come to seek the welfare of the people of Israel." It uses the word displease, but the enemy ultimately didn't do anything there. And I think that's because work hadn't been done yet. But now we're starting to see that work is being done, and the enemy is actually starting to plot and form plans to combat that. And we see that the true opposition arose when action was taken by God's people. And I think that's to say that Satan doesn't necessarily care if we're talking about solutions and plans. I think he's bothered when we start to take action. I think maybe Satan is okay with us, being in that planning stage, because oftentimes we never get past it. We talk about things that need to be done, but we never, step out and work on those things. And that's my initial thought there. You got anything?
So I really only think about Nehemiah has the same mindset throughout everything that we've seen so far, and that's pray and do. We're going to see that he is going to pray, but he's also going to take action. So he's going to set guards. He's going to make things feasible to continue work. Because at the end of the day, the mission is the wall. And so how much time do you spend focused on the attacks, the opposition? If my goal is to work for God, if my goal is to improve my life, to not do the things, how much time am I going to give to the negativity? How much am I going to give negative people power over my life? How much am I going to allow mockery to take over what I'm trying to accomplish? How long do I let the naysayers, have their way over me? I think that's what we see Nehemiah get ready to do, is say, okay, we got to realize that there is an opposition, but this opposition cannot be our focus. It's the same principles that we've talked about, about our thoughts. Have this mind, a mind that is focused on things that are above, not things that are below, a mind that is focused on the work that's at hand. Can't focus on the opposition. I've got to focus on the task.
Yeah, so we've talked about, Sanballat's the opposer, or the attacks from the outside, or the attacks from the inside, the opposition that they all face. But really, all that comes from the same source, right? I mean, it's not Sanballat or their doubts or fears from the inside. It's Satan. He's the adversary, like you said, and he still fights against us. Let's just say we want to be better Christians, or like we talked about, we want to use better words or have better thoughts or be better people or shine as lights better. But then Satan creeps in with apathy or carelessness or, like Blaine said, procrastination. I have these good ideas and I want to do this, but I want to do it tomorrow and not today, right? So it's still the same adversary that puts division and temptation and bitterness in our marriages, that keeps us away from our kids for long times, and we can't have the influence we want on them. And so I think we got to name it as Satan, and then be a little bit more specific as to say, we are fighting opposition. If I want to, stop doing something in my life, but I keep doing it, I got to name what it is that's causing me to do that, or I'm not going to get anywhere. I've got to figure out how to cut that out and remove that opposition from my life. All right, I'm about to go into the end of this just to knock that out. Do y'all have any thoughts before we? Okay. So I think, it's been opposition, attack. And we were talking about this earlier. And when we said, hey, what are y'all talking about? I said, man, when you get down to like verse 15, it's like you gotta read it in a Scottish accent, because it feels like Braveheart. When he says, we got to fight. I'm not going to do it. For your brothers and your sons and your daughters and your wives and your homes. It's like, this is the climax of the movie. That was verse 14. This is the climax, and the music is building up into a crescendo, and it's about to be really loud, and the battle's about to be fought, and the tides are about to turn. Huh? They'll never take our freedom. And I also use the word crescendo. Don't forget that. Big Verse 15. So when our enemies heard that it was known to us and that God had frustrated their plan, we all returned to the wall, each to his own work. And from that day on, half my servants worked on construction, half held the spears, the shields, the bows, the coats of mail. And the leaders stood behind the whole house of Judah, who were building on the wall. Those who carried burdens were loaded in such a way that each labored on the work with one hand and held his weapon with the other. And each of the builders had his sword strapped at his side while he built, and the man who sounded the trumpet was beside me. And I said to the nobles and to the officials and to the rest of the people, the work is great and widely spread, and we are separated on the wall far from one another. In a place where you hear the sound of the trumpet, rally to us there. Our God will fight for us. Hey, this thing, the tide is turning. They've been upset. They've been worried. They've been fearful. They've been opposed. But now they're saying, hey, we got a plan, and we're going to work this plan. We got this thing all laid out. We know who's not going to procrastinate. We're going to get the work done. We're going to fight. We're going to trust God to fight for us. He says, when you hear that trumpet, you got to come here. We're going to fight together. And we know that God is going to be fighting for us. He says, we're going to fight for one another, and we're going to fight for ourselves. All right. So what do y'all make of those things?
All right. So I've talked about what the enemies. I've talked about what the enemy's plans are. I've talked about what our focus needs to be on as the work. But I do think it's kind of ignorant of us to ignore the opposition. And I think what Nehemiah here does is he says, okay, here's the way that we're going to go about facing the opposition. Here's how we're going to continue the task, but put Sanballat in his place. I'm going to work with a trowel or stone in one hand and a sword in the other. That's pretty awesome. I think that we have to note that it's got to slow down progress on the wall if you can't use both hands for the same task. If you're constantly out looking, it's going to slow progress. It's hard to live with one eye on what you're doing and one eye looking up and looking out and living in constant fear of attack. But he prepares themselves, and so he sets a guy with a trumpet to say, all right, so you work until you hear this trumpet go, and then it's time to fight. Keep your weapon with you. Be prepared. Be ready. I think about how do we bring that into maybe a closer time. When Jesus in Matthew 10 sends out his disciples, he warns them, you've got a job that I want you to do, but know that the opposition is going to be strong. He says, know that they're going to run you out of town. They're going to take you before council. They're going to threaten everything that there is to threaten. He says, don't worry, I'll be with you. But he says, I'm going to send you as sheep in the midst of wolves. Be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. I think Jesus gives them a game plan. Do the work, but be smart about it. I'm going to go about trying to better my life, but I'm going to be smart about it. I'm going to go out and I'm going to try to make a difference in this world, to be the light, to be the salt. But I'm going to be smart about it. I got to know that the opposition is there, and I got to know how to work around and with that opposition. We can't go through life thinking that everything is going to just come easy because it's what God wants. And so I guess one of my what I want to get out of this chapter 4 is that we have work to do. Let's just be prepared, keep our minds focused, but also work around the things that are thrown at us. We can't give up every time he comes to attack. We can't give up every time a negative person comes in the room. We can't give up every time what we're doing is mocked at. But we can be ready for that opposition and know that what we're doing is what God wants. He never promised easy. He just promised that he would be there. And so we've got to keep that at the forefront of our minds, I think. And so we've got a lot of reasons that we stop work, that we lose focus, and that we hide our lights. But there's a lot of those reasons boil down to the same things that Sanballat and Tobias used. And Satan's tactics, they work. That's why he keeps using them. So we've got to look at what's happening and what are we going to do about the opposition and come up with a good game plan for that. And I'm done.
Yes, I think this really just, it kind of goes right along with what Scott was saying. Looking back at verse 10, we see, they're starting to get discouraged. And I think Satan knows that, and he provokes the enemy in verse 11 to, plan an attack. I think that can be true in our lives too. Satan knows when we're, feeling low, and, that's when he's going to attack and, try to pull us away from God. But, as we get down to verses 12, 13, and 14, we see Nehemiah taking action. He didn't sit there and wait for the attack to happen before he took action. He was proactive. And, as a result of that, in verse 15, we see that, the attack, it didn't happen. They knew he was prepared for it, so they just stopped where they were, and he overcame Satan's work there. And I think it's important to note that Nehemiah's work wasn't done once he overcame that attack. They returned immediately to God's work, and applying us to our lives. I think overcoming an attack by Satan, it's a great thing, but our purpose in life isn't to overcome those attacks. At the end of the day, our purpose is to serve God. So I think we need to be proactive, as Scott was saying, and I think we need to, overcome those attacks, but keep our focus on serving God each and every day.
Well said. Let me finish it up by saying, in any area of life, when you're trying to do the right thing, you're going to face resistance, right? I had this talk with one of our kids yesterday. We were trying to do something, and he was trying to do something new. And I said, hey, you're not supposed to be good at it right now. Like you're learning, you're trying to grow, you're trying to do something that's hard for you to do. So it's supposed to be frustrating at times. It's not supposed to be easy. So in any area of life, when we try to grow and do the right thing and be the kind of person we're supposed to be, we're going to face resistance and opposition. All right. But at the same time, what we do in the middle of that struggle is what decides what kind of person we're going to become, right? If I give up and I say, this is just too hard, then I'm never going to grow as a Christian or as a husband or as a spouse or as a parent or whatever it may be. I'm never going to be a better light or a better salt or a better not judger or whatever it may be. And so let's get our eyes off of what we can't do. And let's admit that sometimes it is going to be hard to do what we should do. Let's just do it. Make mistakes. There's forgiveness for that. But the point is, there will be opposition. It's going to be hard sometimes. Not supposed to be easy. Jesus never promised it was going to be easy. He did promise that he was going to be there with us and that he was going to never leave us or forsake us. And we see in Nehemiah that God's promised that he's going to be right there in the middle of the struggle, fighting for us, and I believe fighting with us to help us overcome whatever that opposition is. All right, hope y'all have enjoyed this. I know we have, and hope you have a great night, and we will see you in some shape, form, or fashion on Sunday morning at 9 o'clock. Have a great night.